The first question I always ask is, what's your strategic narrative? Which always opens up like, what is a strategic narrative if they don't know about my work, right? And that's the most revealing question. And the strategic narrative is really like, what is the story of your arc of your life and of your family life? Because it's not just you, it's whoever you share your life with. What I find is if somebody doesn't have a story, not goals, a story, then you are always going to be driven by fear and by monetary rewards.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step.
Just let go.
We have Kyle Nell on the show today. He's the coolest neuroscientist that you will ever meet. He is the president of Singularity Labs at Singularity University. And prior to that, his company was acquired by Singularity University. The company is called Uncommon Partners. So in a nutshell, Kyle is an innovator. He's a voice of authority when it comes to both innovation and transformation. He's using adaptive learning and strategic narrative to make a huge impact, whether that's with his family and how they live their lives, or in huge corporate entities like Lowe's, for example. Speaking of, the first commercially manufactured object off of the planet was a Lowe's wrench that was modified for astronauts, thanks to Kyle. Now, when I want to measure something that feels intangible, but I know there's a way to quantify it, I just don't know how, I go to Kyle. He is a wizard at taking storytelling and narrative and allowing us to learn in a different way, allowing us to expose new data and have new findings based on telling stories. What I love about this conversation with Kyle is that he applies his insight, his expertise to his family as well to help have a better quality of life overall. And he talks through how you can do that too. Kyle is the co-author of Leading Transformation, a best-selling Harvard Business Review press title that came out in fall of 2018. I learned so much every time I speak with Kyle, and I know you will too. So without further ado, here is Kyle Nell. Kyle, welcome to the Why Not Now show. Thank you so much for joining me today. And in the spirit of Why Not Now, let's hop right in as we do. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now?
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, I thought about this a lot. Like which one to talk about? I feel like all of life is a series of why not now. And the one that came to mind was I had started the Lowe's Innovation Labs, and I had built this whole thing to help transform a traditional, no one would associate like a Lowe's home improvement with big transformational change. And through the systems that I developed using strategic narratives, so tool and applied neuroscience and innovation, we were able to do some pretty wild things at a place like Lowe's, like put a 3D printer in space and build autonomous robots and exosuits and build the largest virtual reality, augmented reality showrooms and stores at the time. A 3D scanning system, like all kinds of things. And what had happened was I use those same tools in my personal life. So I use strategic narrative. So strategic narrative, just very simply, is like, what is your moonshot story? John F. Kennedy was the famous person for putting out the moonshot. He said very clearly, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely again by the end of the decade. That's a very clear moonshot, but we don't really know how to get there. And so I have been applying those same kind of techniques in business life. Like that's how you get it's like Lowe's to do those things, but then also in my personal life. And I got to a point where things had worked. I built it from just me to like this pretty big thing, at least in my view. And it was not furthering. I reached the limit of what I wanted to do, and it was not furthering my family or our personal strategic narrative, like where we want to take it. And at the same time, I had become very, very focused on how messed up education is and learning is. We have a daughter, and at the time she was just starting to get to the age where she was going to be in kindergarten and those kind of things. And we had taken her to all these fancy schools. We were in Seattle at the time, and just realized how broken the system was. And then at the same time, we were doing all this virtual reality learning inside of our stores, and realizing that was way better than traditional learning of just having a person talk at you. So all of this stuff was swirling where I really wanted to be a part of transformational, systematic change and provide tools to people to be better and to learn better and to be faster and better learners. There was a moment where I was talking with my wife, and my wife was like, you got to quit. And this is like where money's great. Stock options are great. I've got a little notoriety in the world. Got a book coming out on Harvard Press that hadn't come out yet. Like all the things that like in my wildest dreams before, I would have never thought in a million years that I would hit that. Well, it sounds so silly, but like, that those things that people put on their LinkedIn, like that are, important, right? And we work hard for. And so I had all the trappings of success, but once you got over that hill, it was like, well, what now? And so that was her question to me. We've achieved this. You've achieved this. We've achieved this as a family, because no one ever does anything alone, right? Mm-hmm. What now? And so she didn't say why now. She said, what now? And that's always been the thing. And throughout our entire married life, she's always the one to ask, well, what now? What now? What now? We're too comfortable. What now? And wow. So that was it. Right after that, I formulated my plan, and I went and I quit my job. And I quit my job in order to do the things I was doing at Lowe's for other organizations across the world. Use strategic narrative as a tool to help transform any organization, which we did. We started a company called Uncommon Partners with my good friend and co-founder. She was like my number 2 at Lowe's, Amanda Manna. And we left and we started this thing. But the main thing we wanted to build was what I'm in love with, called adaptive learning. So this is neuro-adaptive virtual reality learning. And if I hadn't had that moment, it would have been very easy to continue on the treadmill of managing a large global team, speaking at events, building cool stuff, getting good press. I mean, you can get on that treadmill and you're doing good stuff, but the real question is, what now and why not now? And that was really revealing. And that's why I left, to start this thing. And now it exists, which is pretty wild.
Okay. So I'm over here taking notes, and I just want to underline a couple of things that you said, because it's worth like doubling down. First of all, the fact that it was your wife that said the what now.
Yeah.
That's really unique, because oftentimes I feel that our family loves to keep us in our zone of excellence, where they see us thriving. They're like, you're doing great. This is what you're good at. Look at, they want us to be in that safe spot where we're thriving, per se. So for her to have that, not only self-awareness, but family awareness and awareness of you, to say, nope, you need to keep going. You need to move on here. That's amazing. That's just really cool to have a partner like that. So I guess I have so many questions. One is, what were the signs, the tangible signs? Like Tony Hsieh and I used to talk about the alarm clock hitting the snooze button. And his first company, he was like, I knew something had to change when I kept hitting snooze and I couldn't get myself out of bed as the founder. What were some of the things? I mean, you sounds like you noticed the education system and seeking where you wanted to send your daughter, but like in your day, where you're just like, oh, this isn't turning me on. But on the outside, I've got it all. I'm checking boxes.
Totally. So I have done a lot of media things, and I speak at conferences, pre-COVID and all that stuff, and I can turn it on, but I'm actually a pretty intense introvert.
Okay.
And I know people won't believe that, and but it sucks a lot of energy out of me to be in front of people. And so what had happened was, what I really get my energy from is building things. I like that really early stage of like, it can't be done. No one's ever done it before. How can I convince somebody to come and join this team, or to give us this resource that we can't buy? Or like, I love that. Like, even talking about it, like, makes me excited. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what it ended up happening, it's like it's that old adage, if the hero lives long enough, he or she becomes the villain. And I felt like at a certain point we had won and become heroic so many times. My little team had grown to be a bigger team, and we were doing great. Everything was great. It was great. But at a certain point, the burden of bureaucracy and running a group that big, although they're all amazing and Lowe's was a wonderful experience, I shifted to becoming more of a spokesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, Kyle, like, let's send you over here to go and rally the troops and get everyone excited, which is great. And I don't mean to minimize that, but that's not what my purpose was. Mm-hmm. I realized at a certain point that I was talking more about what I'd done rather than building something that I wanted to build. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't fulfilling. I felt like I was a band, and people were just yelling at me, like, play the hits, and then you're like, but I got all this new stuff.
Right. Or you're kind of an athlete that wanted to go out on top of your career, right? You won your championship. You don't need to stick around, get hurt, and then fizzle out, and nobody remembers your name.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd gotten a little fat around the middle, and it was time to move on, right? Into the next phase. And like you said, you either do that intentionally, or it becomes, I didn't want to, like you said, I always want to leave on a high note. That old George Costanza thing from Seinfeld, like, always leave on a high note. And I really believe that you got to leave it a high note, but it's hard. There's no real sign. There's not like one day for a lot of things where it's like, at this exact moment, this exact thing happens. That happens sometimes, but most of the time, at least for me, it's these signs, like you're saying, these alarm clock moments where you're like, there's a shift that happens. Mm-hmm. And it's like almost like a disquiet in yourself and in your family life, at least for me, that something is not where it could be. Mm-hmm. And it's really, for me, it's the delta between not success in the eyes of the world or success in your bank account, but it's like the delta between what you're doing now versus what you could do if you made yourself more uncomfortable, or if you tried something you weren't expecting. Okay. And that knowing or feeling, or that gnawing feeling of what that delta could be, is why my wife asked, well, what now? Because she knows we can do something else or do something more, and we'll figure it out together. And that's what's so cool. And so anyway, that's really it. That's the thing that drives me. And that's our family narrative of where we're going. It's always like trying to find that other spot.
Okay. I want to touch back on narrative in a second, because it's another thing I wrote down. But before that, by the way, shout out to your co-founder from Uncommon Partners, Amanda. She's a renegade. So got to give her total renegade. Okay. So the intense introvert and the self-awareness of that. And I just was having a conversation last night with a friend who, she is really, she's resistant towards some growth because of some stock options, right? Because she's got some amazing carrots, and it's almost like this fear-based mentality that is planted when we get those big opportunities, those carrots. And I think now we're seeing it not only in corporate, but now we've got startup land and, like healthy growth stage companies. Let's bring your relationship with money into this for a second, because I think people listening could really relate. I think, the fact that you realized, hey, I'm talking more about what I've done than doing more of what I want to keep doing or the next thing. So if you were to advise someone right now who's in a situation that you were in, and they're like, man, but that's so much security for my family. And I don't know if I just wait maybe 6 more months, or if I do this, I think we're going to get bought by private equity, or we're going to go public. What do you say to someone in that moment? What questions would you ask them?
The first question I always ask is, what's your strategic narrative? Which always opens up like, what is a strategic narrative if they don't know about my work, right? And that's the most revealing question. And the strategic narrative is really like, what is the story of your arc of your life and of your family life? Because it's not just you, it's whoever you share your life with. And what I find is, if somebody doesn't have a story, not goals, a story, then you are always going to be driven by fear and by monetary rewards. Okay. How many people do you know? I mean, honestly, when we hang out with people that are wealthy and well-to-do, how many wealthy people do you know that are just miserable? They're divorced, their kids don't like them, they're unhealthy physically, they just don't seem well. So there's, not to say that money doesn't help, but it's not the solution to those problems. But what ends up happening if you don't have that thing that's pulling you and that's driving you in a way that is cogent and something you can refer back to, you will always default back to the shorter term things. And that is the trap. That is the trap. So I always say, what is your narrative? And then people ask what that means. And really what that is you, in my view, you have to have a concrete written story with characters, conflict, and a narrative arc about where you've been, where you are now, and where you're going. And for our family has a 10-year horizon. And we even do that with our kids. So we have little kids, and we call it the Christmas card exercise. So what we do is every year on January 1st, we write the Christmas card for the letter for the next year. We don't share with anybody, but it's our thing. Like, what would you want to say?
Love it.
What would you want to say? Because then it's something we can all get behind. So then when trade-offs start to happen and we say, well, we could do this good thing or this good thing, which good thing wins? Well, we had agreed as a family that we were going to achieve these things, individual things together, individual things separate, and these other things together. Does this good thing help us get there, or does this good thing help us get there? And which one does it more? And it makes it very simple. And what I find is with people that are struggling with this question, it's not easy. It's not easy for me. It's not easy. But if you don't have that, you are really lost. And it feels overwhelming because you don't have that North Star.
Okay. So without a strategic narrative, you're going to default to fear or money and probably lean there, which is a trap. I love this year in advance, kind of reverse engineering the Christmas card, what you want in the Christmas card. I keep going back to, it's like ringing in my head. You got to a point where it sounds like, to use our former Austin resident, Matthew McConaughey, was on the show. He's like, there were times where I was more impressed and less involved. And I wanted to, don't you love that? He's like, I realized it's time to get more involved and less impressed. More involved and less impressed. And I thought about this morning, literally a couple hours ago, which also reminds me of another Austin, but like bright mind, but thinking about, do you want to be the important person, or do you want to do the important thing? When you clearly have a sense of purpose that drives you, did you ever feel like there was a time where you were a little intoxicated by the spotlight? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And how did you catch yourself? What'd you do?
Yeah. And this comes back to, it's very easy to get enticed by the smallest bit of notoriety, like the smallest bit. I think everyone thinks of themselves as, oh, that won't happen to me, or, oh, that won't bother me. And it happens in increments, right? You start off again, just being super scrappy. You're the only one. Everyone thinks you're out to lunch and this will never work. And then all of a sudden, when things start to work out, then all of the people that were against you are now for you, and they prop you up, right? And that happens, right? You're smiling because this happens, right? It happens on the regular. And what had happened to me is I never had notoriety like that before, ever. I was always like either academic in the background, or I was too junior or whatever. And so once we started getting these accolades and these awards, they would put me out on stage. And then at the same time, my team was growing a lot. And the awards and everything, I mean, it just starts to kind of mess with you a little bit. You start to believe like, oh yeah, we can do everything. And we can. but it's not about you. That's the problem. The second that it becomes about you, the person, like the great one, it's all done then. It's all done then. And so I started to see that in myself, where I was seeing like how bad people wanted me to come speak at things or whatever. And then almost starting to feel, I mean, it wasn't one-to-one, but you almost start to assess your worth in a way by which conference you're going to and how that's being received. And the second that I felt that, I was done. I didn't want to be anywhere a part of that. That's not what I want to do, because I want to do, and like you said, I want to do important things. I don't want to talk about the things I've done or to try to be like a hype man for innovation. But it is a hard thing. And I think this goes back to, who do you surround yourself with in your family? You know, who are those people close to you that go, honey, you're acting stupid. This is dumb. What are we doing? Your shirt is ridiculous. Like those kind of things that only your significant other can tell you in a loving way. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's my family. You know, my family, my wife, I mean, everyone loves their family, right? But my wife, she's incredible. She grew up mostly on a farm in Central Washington. And so money doesn't really drive her at all. What drives her is success in life, and like having a successful family life, and we're successful religious life, and having successful, doing things that matter, and doing things that matter for the planet and for people. And if those things aren't happening, we have a ton of money in our bank and we're not together, this is a waste. And so I find that's the other component too, is people that are really, really struggling, maybe don't have those people in their life that are pushing towards the same goals, and they don't have the strategic narrative. That combination of things together can cause a lot of turmoil.
Okay. So that's a great additional tip. Look around. Do who are you surrounded with, and who are you spending your time with? Who are you listening to? Okay. This is incredible. There's so many other questions, and I think I might be able to thread them into this next part. But so for those listening, Kyle has been incredible in helping me kind of understand a little bit more around the relationship between kind of confidence and how we can look at it and study it, even at the basic level of, as someone who is a complete novice. You've helped me understand that we can look at physiological things and start to get some quantitative info and insight here, which is fascinating because they're topics that seem so intangible, but they're important, but you're measuring these things and you're able to do it at grand scale and with big partners who can make big impact in the world based off of what you're learning. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because you were able to shift, let's just say, from the corporate world, because I guess let's call it like it is, even though you're in the innovation side of the corporate world, like this little juxtaposition, but you're still working in that world, but in a completely different capacity. And I notice with so many women that we work with, the tendency is to do a 180. Like, oh, I don't want that anymore. Yes. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm over it. I'm over corporate. I'm going over here. And you didn't do that. And I really respect and appreciate that you adjusted the calculus, but you didn't reinvent the wheel completely, right? So let's talk. Tell me what you're doing. How would you explain what you're doing now so we can better understand where that next step in the adaptive learning is today?
Yeah. I have like the worst job for my 10-year-old daughter to try to explain to other people what it is that her dad does for a living. She's like, I don't know. I think it's
in the space.
Yeah, she's like into space, neuroscience. It's too hard to explain.
Moonshot, I don't know.
Yeah, this is not like, neighborhood party conversation. It's not easy. So I started off by saying that. So my background is in behavioral science on the marketing research side. And so I worked in advertising when I got out of undergrad, and that was great. And I worked as a brand planner, which is basically marketing research for advertising. And I learned a ton. I come from an advertising family. My dad's an advertiser. He's also an artist. It's one of his paintings behind me.
I was wondering who that is. Just people can't see probably, but
this is the real quick. So my dad's a fine artist, like a really great artist, and then he got into advertising, for insurance. And so, but he's a famous, he's pretty famous guy. Anyway, so one year, my dad asked me one for Christmas, and I said, "Oh, I would love you to oil paint me a picture of Snoop Dogg in a Baroque style with a gaudy gold frame that I can hang behind me during my Zoom calls." And lo and behold, for Christmas, that's what I got. So this is
Oh
my dad
gosh.
honoring now. So
how funny.
Is that funny?
How cool is that? I thought it was Snoop, but I was like, do you
Snoop.
even go there? You're talking to a neuroscientist.
That's right. No, it's Snoop. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Okay,
Snoop,
that's
and it's
so
my dad.
cool.
Yeah. So that tells you a little bit about how I grew up, right? So anyway, so long story short, so I became enamored with that, and then I went to graduate school at University of Wisconsin to get my MBA and to study marketing research and behavioral science. Then I had this amazing professor he taught qualitative research, which I won't go into all the detail, but we got super into like all these other things, and it just blew my mind. It actually turned into the beginnings, the buddings of applied neuroscience. And this is back in the day when people called it big data. Remember when we called it big data? Like that's when I went to grad school. So I had this. So I had this moment, or at the same time, I had these ideas of how a large organization could change by using narrative as a driver. And I wasn't learning that in my MBA program, nothing against MBAs, but everything was like bullet points and being pithy and stuff like that. But in all of my study, I found that actual decision-making and change happens through story. So those two truths that are contradictory can't really exist at the same time, right? So something's wrong or the math is wrong. And so at the same time, I had this amazing professor who was from Denmark, but was here in the US teaching for 1 year. And he connected me back to Copenhagen Business School. Long story short, I was either going to go and work at Walmart. The decision was I was either going to go to work at Walmart corporate headquarters and apply what I was learning and try to learn how a large organization worked, or I was going to go and pursue my PhD in Denmark. And what ended up happening was I went to Walmart, of course, but at the same time, I stayed really close with who would have been my PhD advisor. His name's Dr. Thomas Ramsøy. And over time, when I went to Lowe's, I was applying neuroscience in an academic setting on every single thing that we studied. So whether it was virtual reality or augmented reality, I would put EEG headsets on people and eye tracking goggles, and I could see what was going on in real time. And then I could make adjustments to the interface or to the experience that was imperceptible or not something that someone would say out loud, but I could tell that this part of the experience was overwhelming, or that people weren't even seeing that button in the corner. And I could adjust those things in real time to make the experience better for the person, for the employee, for the person. And so we were getting so good at that, working with him while he was a professor at Copenhagen Business School, that I convinced him to leave and to start a company. So tell you how persuasive I can be is to get a Norwegian tenured professor to leave his job to start a company. And it went really well. It's called Neurons Inc. You should check it out. They're doing quite well. But anyway, so we were building these things. And at the same time, I was building all this virtual reality training and seeing that virtual reality training was about 40% more effective than traditional training, right? 40%. That's Looney Tunes, right? And it's experiential, and it allows you to learn stuff that you can't learn from a book or from someone telling you, right? It's muscle memory. It's all that stuff. It's how we intuitively learn. And then at the same time, I was seeing all of these significant advancements in neuroscience that weren't making it to the what is called neuromarketing, like this, I would say this shadow of a shadow of a shadow of what's really going on in the neuroscience world, where you're just doing ad testing and things like that. Nothing against that, but when it made it down to the business world, it was so old or snake oil that it was hard to figure out what was real or not. So we were going straight to the source. So the big idea for me was, why don't we combine, since learning is such a huge global problem, massive, doesn't matter if you're the richest family in the universe or the poorest kid, wherever, we all have a learning problem. It's a universal human need, especially with the way the world's changing. So my big idea was, why don't we take virtual reality, this is a great modality to learn in, and then combine it with applied neuroscience and all the data that makes sense from that, and then make the learning adaptive in real time in order to make the learning as efficient at driving the outcomes that you want. So higher retention rates of learning, more desire to perform the act in real life, like all of those things we can modify for in real time. And that was the big idea. So that was what drove me. Once I realized that we could do both, they were separate, but that you could combine the things together. and that the technology was just starting to get to the point where we could do it, that's when I knew I had to leave. And so that's what we're doing now is we're working right now with large organizations to create this adaptive learning. And it's already magnitudes better than that 40%. And we're using it for things that, like you said at the beginning, haven't been known to be quantifiable. They're things that we see the outcome for later on. Like there's all of those studies that talk about how having a diverse group leads towards better outcomes, but we don't exactly know how or why, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same way, that old thing, like 50% of my ad spend is wasted. I just don't know which 50%.
Which one it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you can't break it apart. Right. Yeah. So, but with this, what you can see is moment by moment, how things are working, where they're not working, and we can adjust. So for instance, for a very large retailer, we're building a diversity and inclusion trainer so that people can understand, can be in rooms, whether you're the person whether you're the person in the room that is not the majority, or in different power positions, whether you're really low on the level or really high up, what it's like, and you can feel what it's like, and you can actually experience different scenarios, not knowing that this is diversity and inclusion is the focus. And then then afterwards, we go over with you to say, you missed that thing over there, that terrible thing that other man said to that woman. You didn't even notice. Like, and then having that reflection moment. And then when we see right afterwards is that their ability to peripherally expand what their scope of influence is changes. And then they become better people and better leaders, because now they can see that actually I need to watch for things like that. And then also, how do I address it? It's easy to say things like that, but when you get to experience it, that's where the change happens. And that's why we need to have, in my view, different ways of learning so that we can learn faster. I heard a report the other day that it's so interesting with medical school in particular. Medical school is always 4 years, or has usually been about 4 years, but they keep learning new stuff. So there's more information crammed into 4 years. Every single year, there's new med students coming in. Well, how are we going to teach everything? We have to change it. We have to change it.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us. Just to be able to point out someone's blind spots quickly and address them and move on to the next, that's life work for some people, right? Well, for therapy can only go so quickly, right?
Right.
But within organizations, it's interesting because even looking at like social issues and things that if you were to extrapolate what you're learning within these big organizations, high volume, like lots and lots of data and lots of representation, and be able to share that with the world, whether it's, I think about like the Me Too movement, how complex it was in some cases maybe not, but there's a narrative that comes out of this that I think is just so worthy of being exposed and shared, because things are not always black and white. And it's like, you're just living in this gray area and shining a big spotlight and starting to get to the root of some of this systemic stuff, right? So
totally. And it goes back to the thing that everyone says, put yourself in their shoes. Well, that's a great idea, but it's very hard to do. Right. And so I'm a white guy, when the Me Too movement happened, frankly, I was shocked by all of the people, all the women around me and other people that were saying these stories. I was gobsmacked that this was going on, and it was so pervasive. Like, I legit I knew there was a problem, but I did not know that it was at this level. Why? Because I'm me, because I don't have those experiences. Those things don't happen to me. And so that was a big moment. So how do you put yourself in someone else's shoes? The one way to do that is in virtual reality. It's not the only way, but it's a great way to be able to do things like that. So if you're a senior executive, happens to be some, older white gentleman, you can be that that younger teenage black kid that's at the store that's getting the side eye from your employees and what that feels like. Mm-hmm. I don't have to tell you what it feels like. You can experience what that's like, and then you decide what changes you want to make.
It's like empathy in a headset almost, right? It's just to be able to quickly have that's just fascinating. So How do you learn, Kyle? Like, what do you do on a regular basis to do as much as you can to continue your education?
So I listen, Stephen Kotler, who you had on earlier, love Stephen. Stephen's a good friend. He's awesome. I mean, the flow state is a desired place to be, but it's hard to know when you're in it, right? It's almost easier to know when you were in it rather than when you're in it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, that was the good old days. Like you can think about that, right? So it's hard to know when you're in the good old days, right? And so for me, what is the primary, if there's one thing, how you know you're in the state for me is manageable discomfort. So one of the biggest things that we test for in our adaptive learning is a measure called cognitive load. So you don't want to be overwhelmed. I mean, this is very reductive, but you want to be overwhelmed or underwhelmed. You just want to be in this like whelmed state, right? It's weird that whelmment is not a word, but you want to be in that middle zone, right? Where you're being challenged, but you're not being crushed by the challenge. And you also don't want to be in that state where anyone's ever driven to work and they don't remember how they got there. Like you get in there like, I don't even remember driving. Like that's not a good place to be either. So you want to be in that middle state. And for me, the way I can assess that again is by feeling discomfort, but not feeling overwhelmed. And that's essentially it. Is this pushing me to the point where I feel like I'm breaking, or is it pushing me to the point where I feel uncomfortable? And that discomfort is a great thing. It's a great thing. And I think that we're always trying to minimize pain or discomfort, and that's incorrect in my view, if you're striving to improve.
This is so good. It's one of the number one things I notice among all of these epic minds that I'm able to speak with is that they crave some of that uncomfort. And it's truly a craving. They seek it. But so my question for you, do you have to keep raising the bar? Do you become immune with levels of discomfort where you just have to keep, it's almost like the Richter scale, what used to be a 10 is now a 2. And then I would imagine that's kind of becomes exponential, and I don't know, I'm making this up.
No, it does. It does. And I would think of it as like almost like if anyone listening remembers a spider chart, right? So there's all these different dimensions and where the discomfort happens, right? So it's maybe not linear in this way, but it's multidimensional. So I'm pushing myself in this way right now, but maybe I shift it this way a tick into other areas where I'm really uncomfortable and doing this or this or that. And that's enough to put me in that discomfort level, even though I'm doing the same thing. Maybe I'm not an accountant, but I got to get in on the taxes and I got to do this thing, even though I hate it. That shift, even though you're still at the same job, pushes you into a different spot. Or maybe you're having interpersonal issues with someone in your family, like an extended family member or something. And having those difficult conversations also pushes you into a different spot. And again, it's about the people around you too that can call you out when you're stuck in a feedback loop where you are working and you're having the hallmarks of success, but you're not actually improving.
It sounds very dynamic in that, it's not this one dimension linear thing. I think about confidence that way a lot when, we talk a lot about and focus on confidence in the workplace and confidence in career, especially among women. And I just look at confidence as this, we just throw this one word out, but I know even personally, confidence in my bathing suit is like at a 0, but maybe confidence in the boardroom, I feel much more comfortable. And there's different types, you can't just bundle this all up into one. She's confident. She's not. It's so situational. It feels like
it is so situational. And that's where, going back to the neuroscience, in the moment is when it happens, whatever it is. And so if your learning is happening in the moment, 2 hours ago, your brain and your body might be in a completely different spot than it is 2 hours later or at the evening or whatever. So to say that something is adaptive, it has to be adaptive in the moment. And when you think back to, for everyone listening too, if you think back to your favorite teacher, he or she was probably really good at empathetically getting in front of you before you knew you needed something and presenting something to you that you didn't even understand at the time you needed. Mm-hmm. Like you always think about, like my favorite professors in college, Bruce Cush, who's the president of Ensign College now, is one of my professors at BYU, Idaho. And he always put something a little bit further out that I didn't think I could do. And he pushed me further. And I think that's intuitive. So we're trying to do the same kind of things, but at a grander scale. And we can design our lives that way as well. We really can. You can design your life to push you to that extra step.
So interesting. So interesting. So how do you get your news? So it sounds like you have certain people you follow, like, Stephen, amazing. And you've been surrounded by these people, I'm sure, most of your career and have sought them out. But how else do you, get news and maybe don't?
Yeah, like you mean just like the regular news from the world?
Or if it's industry information, whatever. Do you how do you consume information?
Yeah, I'm really careful about how I consume information too, because it goes back to like the dark pattern of trying to get your amygdala to focus on different things. Then you kind of go down that rabbit hole, like, the YouTube dark pattern of like, it's been talked about for like TurboTax and stuff like that, but it's the same kind of pattern that keeps you away from actually learning something that you can do. And so yeah, what I do is I have a curated Apple News feed, and that's how I read my news. So I like to read anything that's long form because I feel like that is a higher level of depth into content on the world events. And then for current things, the best stuff is just connecting with people that are really on the front lines. You had Lisa Stone on, who is, I know, a mutual friend, and she introduced us. She's on our board. And she is like plugged into everybody. I mean, I joke, she's like the Ferris Bueller of this universe. She knows everybody.
Yes.
And so it's great to have those people that you can reach out to and have those regular check-ins with, because they keep you connected to people and to ideas, because the world is changing so fast. It's impossible to wait for it to come to your newsfeed. And so having those people that I trust is really important. I have that core group of probably 10 folks that I talk to on a regular basis about cool stuff that's happening.
Right on. That's so cool. I imagine like the secret Twitter list that Kyle has somewhere of just, I have a few, and I feel like sometimes you have to keep them groomed and definitely scrub them too, because things can change, but it can be good to just cut through and be like, okay, what are they talking about today? Because they can help me.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing too, is if you have like a couple of people talking about similar things, it generally means it's not just an anomaly, but maybe it's a thing now. Maybe it's becoming a thing. And it's interesting to see both individual data points and trends at the same time.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So we started and we talked a bit about moonshot goals. What's yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say right now, the focus for me and for my family is all around fixing stuff that's intractable. Right now, we live in a time where the only tax or the only real barrier to doing anything you want to do is time and persuasion. It's not even money. It's who can you persuade to do this or to do that. And if your focus is there, to be able to learn this or that to build it. So we have a couple of things that just need to get fixed. The first one to me right now is learning. Learning is broken. And if you're looking for a list of things that are broken that need to be fixed, look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They have laid it out and codified it. And you'll also find people that are working along those things. So learning is SDG 4. So we are focused on SDG 4. My wife designs a food forests. So, food that more naturally builds on itself with very little water and human intervention. It's a permaculture thing for those that are familiar with that. And so we do that at home. We grow most of our own food. And then we also have a little farm just a little bit out of town that we do that with as well. And we're just doing it because the food system is busted, right? You can get super expensive organic food, but by the time it gets to your plate, it's nutritionally really low. And we're the ones that have it the best if there are folks that have it less. So you can for me, I look at the SDGs and I think these are the things that need to be fixed. And then how can I use my network and my know-how and my money to be an influence to be able to help to address those things? So that's my moonshot. I know it's very broad, but every single thing, whether I'm on a board, whether I'm speaking at an event, if it's a business thing that I'm working on, if it's not very clearly directly tied to an SDG, I'm not doing it. It's not worth my time.
That answered it perfectly. It's just mapping where your time is spent and your And your goal. Okay. So, and can you say again the United Nations where that list is? What is it called?
The Sustainable Development Goals. They're incredible. So if you just go on Google and type in, UN Sustainable Development Goals, the shorthand is SDGs. And what you'll notice too is there's a circular emblem or icon. You'll see people at conferences and things that they'll have them on there. Okay. And so you'll know somebody, like if you ever meet somebody and you see their emblem, like, oh, you're into the SDGs too. And you already have all that in common.
Ooh, I love it. So anyone listening that a lot of people come and they say, you know what, I feel like I'm ready for a why not now moment. I don't know what I want to do next, but go look at this list and think about where your passion, your purpose, and your skill collide in a little Venn diagram and start seeing if you can tackle one of these SDGs. Maybe that's a little thing for you to do. I want to go look at it. Look at the list. So let's wrap it up, Kyle. But if we were to go back to, you're sitting at Lowe's, actually you're on a plane, you're getting ready to go speak at this fancy conference to talk about the work you've done, leading innovation at Lowe's and putting 3D printers on, just in space or all these things. And you realize, okay, I'm not sure that this is, I'm talking more about what I'm doing than I'm actually doing more of what I want to be doing. What would you say to yourself in that moment if you could go back, knowing what you know now?
I would have done it sooner.
Wow. Okay.
I would have left, not, years earlier, but I would have left sooner. There's one, it's a big question because there's one thing that I wished that I would have understood more before is that these things that feel like the bingo of life, most of them aren't very important. So like I had a chip on my shoulder. There's things I really felt anxious and I wanted to do. One was I wanted to be able to prove that you could do big things inside of a traditional company. Did it, got to the top of that and was like, okay, what next? And then the next thing was start my own company instead of just investing in other people's companies and then get that company acquired, which we did in pretty short order. But then you get there and you're like, okay, well, what now? And so those check boxes are helpful, but that doesn't really lead to anything that's transformational necessarily. And like, if you've ever, you've done this too, like when people that are driven and entrepreneurial in this way, whether they're inside of an organization or outside, once they hit their goal or they hit their perceived goal at the end of it, it's very empty. It's hard to explain, but it is such a terrible feeling. It's probably one of the worst feelings because you were believing that this thing was going to be so great. It's like a meal that you're preparing for, like, oh, it's going to be so delicious. And you try it and you're like, oh, that's it. What a waste, what a bummer. And so having this for me, going back to the strategic narrative for myself personally and my family, because if your family isn't working well, then you're not working well, whatever that looks like for you. That's what drives the next thing and the next thing and what we're going to focus on and what we're not going to focus on. And so that's the hard thing. In your Venn diagram, it's not just your Venn diagram, is what I would say.
That is so enlightening. Yes, that is so true. I mean, it makes so much sense. And I'm now thinking about the exercise I like to do with my family and look at it that way more versus the siloed individuals and their the bingo of life. Love it. Thank you for doing important work and sharing your wisdom and time with us, and also just the time that you've spent with me. I really, really appreciate it, and my team. We're learning a lot from you, and really grateful.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for the time. Thank you for talking with me and inviting me to this amazing podcast. And your team's amazing. Obviously, a lot of love between our teams here. Thank you so much.
Everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your why not now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?